My name is John Mugno, and welcome to Rye Brook Focus. The new Village of Rye Brook budget comes into effect on June 1st. In that budget documents, there are detailed assessments on the village's website that could inform you about what's in the budget and what the revenues and the expenditures are. But we'll show you later how you can effectively dive into the budget through the village's financial transparency software. My guest today is Chris Bradbury, the village administrator, who is here to help us understand in brief the village's economics. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our budget today.
Okay, Chris, we should first mention what for many will be their bottom line. How much are the property taxes of the average homeowner rising, and how much of an increase is it from the last fiscal year?
Sure. Well, first, I'd say the overall tax levy, or the amount to be raised through property taxes, is going up 3.86% for the average taxpayer. That's below the New York State tax cap for the 12th time in 13 years. But you asked about the average homeowner. So the average property owner or homeowner has an average assessed value of $995,000, and that particular homeowner would pay annual village taxes in the amount of $5,035 for the village, which is an increase of about $167 a year, or just under $14 per month.
Okay. And what do you mean by the tax levy? Maybe our listeners won't be familiar with that concept.
Sure, absolutely. So the amount that you need to raise, so after you take all your expenses and then you add up all the other revenues other than property taxes, things like department revenues or other state revenues that you might get, or sales tax revenues. You take all the other revenues that come in, and the balance that needs to be funded is what is known as the tax levy. And the levy is how much you need to ask the town assessor and the tax collector, how much the tax collector has to raise through taxation, through the property tax, and they will go out and collect that money from the taxpayers. So the levy is the amount that needs to be raised from property taxes specifically.
Okay. And the total property tax levy is estimated about $19.4 million to finance a budget of $26.9 million. The remaining $7.5 million comes from other revenues, $6 million, and transfers from capital accounts, $1.5 million. What are the main sources of other revenues?
Sure. And we do, some of them are fixed from other areas, and we'll get into that. But other areas, we always try to look for new revenue sources that will help offset that property tax. So if there's other ways that we can collect money that won't impact the taxpayers, that's always preferable, because property tax will be your largest portion of all those revenues. So some examples would be like sales tax distribution, and we get a distribution through Westchester County that we share from taxes not collected from Rye Brook, but throughout the county. We get a share of that. That's about $2.5 million. Department income. So if you think about like the building department, the revenues there, people, large developments, small developments, people pay fees to the building department. That's about $800,000 is budgeted for this coming year. Recreation fees is another example, and most of that is to offset cost, for our recreation programs, and that's about $430,000. One that's an example of an unusual program that we run that only two in the county that I know of, two municipalities run, is an after-school program. That's one where we do generate additional revenue to offset property taxes. So we run an after-school program. We collect about $190,000 in revenues there, and only costs us about $30,000 or $40,000. So we get extra revenue there to offset taxes. Other departments, police fees, you have alarm fees, things like that. Utilities pay contractual costs for police overtime when they're doing work in the streets. Those are additional revenue. Less traditional revenue are things like a cell tower. We get from the cell tower next to Village Hall. We receive about $140,000 a year. So it's an assortment of different revenue sources like those.
Yeah, so to summarize, the 2.5 million is the sales tax from the
Mhm.
county, and the rest is smaller numbers, but they add up to the other
They all do.
3.5
There's
million.
other ones, there's mortgage taxes. We run a compost site with an operator. They pay us towards to run the operation and also saves us money because we don't need to pay some, most municipalities pay to get rid of their leaves. We bring it up to our compost site where they run an operation and they pay us. So that's an example of how we're able to offset the property tax.
Okay. And the transfers from the capital account?
Okay, capital is extremely important, especially when you look in the Northeast. So we are very dedicated in Rye Brook to a very robust capital program. The reason I say the Northeast, we tend to have older infrastructure here. The weather definitely takes its toll on utility on our infrastructure as well. So having a robust capital program is extremely important in this area of the country. And we tend to have between 1 and 1.5 million, generally, unless it's a special purchase, will pay, of which the largest ones are always road resurfacing, where we put at least $500,000, and sewer money, where we're replacing our sewers infrastructure. Now, residents don't see that, they don't know about it, but it's very critical to have an efficient sewer system and not have leaks throughout the village. There's other issues that come in play there, and we can get violations and so forth. So it's something that people don't see, but it gets very costly. That's paid for, those types of costs are paid for through a fund balance or designated for capital, which is excess fund balance from prior years. What we're trying to do is use existing money above like a 15 to 20% fund balance that is used for non-recurring operating expenses. Because you don't want to use fund balance for like personnel offset personnel costs because it won't be there the next year.
Right.
So where you take excess fund balance, you'll take that and you apply it to the capital project. So this way we can maintain that and not impact the property taxes.
And how do you replenish then your capital reserves?
We do have a healthy reserve for capital, and we have a very disciplined way. If there's excess money, like if we don't try to we're not going to overspend our budget. So whatever excess is left over from the prior year gets transferred over to a capital fund that we reserve for future payments. And that's a good way to, it's a good disciplined way to make sure that, you're not using it to offset, again, non-recurring operating expenses, and, you're using it in a prudent way. At the same time, you don't want to overtax taxpayers. So if you look at our audits, we're very proud of our audits. And we've traditionally always been between, around 3-4% of what we budget. So what I'm saying there is, you look at what we budget and what the actual expenditures are, our revenues are within 3 or 4% of what we budget, and our expenditures are within 3 to 4% of what we budget. And that's a good way to say, all right, we're not under tax paying, and we're not under taxing, and we're not overtaxing people. You'd be concerned if you saw, oh, they're getting an excess of 10%, then you're overtaxing people. We don't want to get in those types of situations. So we very closely look at that. And then where we say we are 3 or 4% within, where we take that and put it towards capital.
So you typically wouldn't have a budget item saying increase in capital fund or something like that
Oh,
to the.
we'll transfer the money. It's very transparent. The board will, as part of the budget adoption, they'll add the same resolutions. There'll be another resolution that will say, okay, and here's the balance left over from last year that we are allocating to a reserve for capital projects account. This way,
Okay.
it's reserved specifically for that. And again, it goes back into infrastructure.
Okay. Now let's turn to how the budget is spent.
Mhm.
From the various budget presentations on the website, it looks like about 65% of the village's expenses are for personnel costs and benefits. These services and benefits, the benefits are mainly health insurance and retirement contributions, I believe, increased by 6.7%, with the percentage change in benefits costs about twice the change in personnel services. In addition to Rye Brook, several other government entities have pointed out that these benefit costs have been increasing more rapidly than other costs. Is there any relief in the with respect to the cost increases on the horizon?
I'd say yes and no. Let me kind of go what I share what I mean by that. So, we'll always personnel costs, personnel and benefit costs are always going to be your biggest expense because government is basically people providing services, right? So you look at police and fire and public works, that's going to be your biggest expense. Again, we're people, and that's your going to be your largest expense here in Rye Brook. That said, you have some costs that are fixed and some costs that you can look to see where you can cut back. So if you look at things like retirement, we don't set the retirement rate. The retirement is a New York State retirement system. Those costs are fixed by New York State. And give you an example, that at one time in my career here, and I've been here 24 years in Rye Brook, that used to cost us $15,000 a year. That now costs like over $1.5 million every year.
Hmm.
That's incredible. 15,000 to over $1.5 million. So if you look at it, the non-police and fire, we pay 18 cents on every dollar spent on personnel, 18 cents goes towards the retirement system. For police and fire, it's 35%, 35 cents on the dollar. So that means for regular pay and overtime pay, every time they work or anybody's working, that's either 18 or 35 cents on the dollar that gets sent the next year to the retirement system.
Wow.
That's a very big cost, and that's a cost we really can't do anything about because those rates are set by New York State. Now, there are other things that are local issues that we can control. Some of them have union issues that we have to negotiate with the unions. Typically, you need to look for programs that are equal or better, but consider continually shopping and looking at different programs that provide equal or better service at a lower rate is the prudent way to go. So, for instance, we're currently considering a health insurance change that we've been working with the unions on that would save the village a lot of money. We have budgeted for next year changes in our dental and our life insurance program. So, those are ways that we're able to save and continue to kind of look for less ways to do things to still provide good coverage. Um, but again, I'm going to come back full circle. Personnel costs, benefit costs, always going to be your biggest expense, but you can continue to try to manage that.
Okay. The third largest budget item is contractual costs, which rose 9%. What are they and what are the drivers?
Sure. Yeah, it's an assortment of ways. So contractual costs are pretty much anything where we contract out for service or outside people are either are paying us or we pay them. So, you have issues that you have as you've become more based on technology, that's been a major change in increasing contractual costs, provides more efficiencies and in some cases will lessen expenses, but the technology contractual cost has gotten very expensive, but it also provides a lot more efficient service. So that's one of the trade-offs that we have. Um, Contractor, we get revenues from our contractual expenses. Another example would be like police overtime, not overtime for service, but they'll hire often like utility companies will pay for police to work overtime and to manage the traffic on the street improvements. Now, there's a revenue offset to that. So there's an expense for overtime, but then there's also an offset by the revenue that they pay us for that service. So sometimes you might see it on both sides. But if you're asking me one of the biggest drivers recently, I'd say technology's had the biggest impact. We're doing more in the cloud, which means you'll see more contractual costs, but you might see more efficiencies on the other side of it that will offset some of those costs. But technology is expensive. Maintaining security for our technology is very expensive. That's another issue where you get a lot of that price has gone up a lot on how we secure our system and the information in our system. But we're doing a lot more in the cloud. But like I'll give you one specific example. This year we're going to online inspections for our building department, online permit applications. That makes it a lot easier for people to submit applications, makes it a lot more efficient in the field. You can get an inspection that gets emailed right to you, but that all has contractual costs where we need to have the software and the service that provide that service. So it is much more efficient and convenient, but it comes at a cost.
Okay. Now, I think maybe you've touched on this, but there are several references in the budget documents to New York State mandates, unfunded mandates. What are the examples of those?
Sure. Well, first thing I'd say is when New York State came out with the tax cap, and that says basically that with some exceptions and in your that get carved out, that you can only raise taxes by 2% or the CPI, whichever is less. Now that's fine, but at the same time, they said that what was also going to be done is restricting unfunded mandates, which never really happened. The state has continued to provide unfunded mandates. What's an unfunded mandate? So, you can't restrict our tax, how much we can raise taxes, and put more financial burden on us that's going to go against that. So an unfunded mandate is just what it sounds like. It's somebody is a federal government or the state government is mandating that we do something that costs money, but there's no revenue offset. So it's basically just going to cost people more, cost Rye Brook more to provide that service. Some examples, we talked about the pension costs. That's
Right.
uncontrollable for us. It's set by the state. That's something that we have to just live with, a very high number. Higher standards for like police and fire, and that's a big fire department, for instance, this has been a big issue. While there's good things in this, like more higher training and protections for firefighters in order to provide service, there's also an additional cost, and that's a good thing, but there's also an additional cost to that. So by mandating that and trying to provide more and requiring more training and requirements, that also we've got to take on the burden of the cost of that. So that's an example of a mandate that we have to pay for. Environmental regulations, there's a lot more on air quality and sewer maintenance that we have to meet the requirements for. And again, they're good things, but they cost a lot more money. So each one of these just keeps adding on. Putting the tax cap in place itself is a mandate that we can exceed it, but it's not very popular to exceed it, and people try to stay within it. Another example would be, other agencies they carve out capital improvements from the tax cap. So that's an example saying, okay, you have a tax cap, but they include the capital improvements in that. So if people who are investing more in their infrastructure get penalized against the tax cap, while other agencies like school districts don't, that the capital improvements are not included in the tax cap. But that's almost a disincentive for municipalities to invest in your capital, which is going to catch up with them over time. We don't do that. We make sure, again, that we have a robust capital, so we're reinvesting because it's going to catch up to everybody if not. But that's an example of how a mandate or even to put in a tax cap, they don't give us the relief to say, no, investing in your infrastructure is a good thing. We'll carve that out of the tax cap. But that doesn't happen, unfortunately, for us. MTA tax is another example. You're forced to require to pay an MTA tax while, like, for instance, the school districts don't have to pay it, but we do. I don't know why, but it is what it is. And I think we should be more like the schools saying, we shouldn't be paying as a government the MTA tax as well.
Now that's an interesting point because they have to say that the cap affects a long-term investment,
Yeah,
capital project. That
absolutely. It's a
seems a little
disincentive to
odd.
invest in your community. It doesn't make sense.
Right. Okay, so we've got this brief overview from you now, but I think some people might want to look in more detail at some aspects. And I think the village has invested in a very nifty software, which I think you can demonstrate for us now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take a lot of pride in being very open and transparent, whether it be development projects and letting people know everything that about the project and every comment that comes in, whether it's from our consultants or residents. But we try to do the same thing with our budgeting and our fiscal transparency. All of our audits are on the website. Most municipalities for the annual budgets just put up this flat PDF of their budget, and it's very tough to read. You can't really find the funds. You don't know where the money's being spent or where the revenues are coming in. But Rye Brook, I'll share my screen now if you don't mind. Rye Brook has a fiscal transparency project, again, that we're very proud of. Give me 1 second. So tell me when the screen is up.
It's up.
Okay, so this is just our webpage. If you go to our main page, you'll see adopted budget, and you can see our budget presentation, that we made, kind of giving an overview. But this page here is our overview of our fiscal transparency project, which is through ClearGov. And ClearGov is an open government fiscal transparency product. And what these all are done is, instead of, you think about a flat PDF, just putting up an image of a budget, what this does is allow you to really dive into different areas of our budget. So you can look through demographics of the village. You can see, what is the village like in terms of, the demographics, our organizational chart, how we budget is in here. So there's just so much information that you can go through. Our financial process, what is our budget process? The transmittal letter, I'll give an overview, a several-page overview of the budget here. Executive overviews are very short. Here's just, you want a quick snapshot, there's just a few paragraphs on that. We give a whole lot of information here that people can look for. How is a tax cap set? And you can see we've always been below the tax cap except 1 year. Fund summaries, but let me give you an example. So if you can go right down to like department expenditures, and we'll go to, you can really pick anything. Pick anything, John. Let's say you want to go to public safety, police,
Sure,
fire?
that was the first, yeah, that's fine.
Which one?
Police or fire, yeah.
So you can go to police, and you can see a summary of the expenditures. You can go over if you hover over any of the graphs, you'll see exactly what they are, what they're trended. Did we ever exceed the budget in that department? It'll drive you right down to the individual lines if you want to see that, where each one of our costs. Remember, we talked about overtime contractual versus regular overtime. And it'll give you a lot more information straight down here about each one of the departments. You can go back here, you can see what about our capital projects? Well, you can go here and you can click on it'll tell you our history, it'll tell you who's spending it, it'll tell you how much debt we have, or capital projects, or where our expenses are in this particular fund. And you can click and say, here, a lot of interest in pickleball courts. People want us to build it. So there's the project that we have, and here's like our various programs, how much it's going to cost. It'll be attachments that say, here's the about examples of, it'll give you like, here's a quote to see how we came up with the cost. I think we put in 30,000, it's 29.9. So it's a very transparent process that we try to really let residents see, and we encourage them to see how we spend our money, where the revenues are coming in, how is it trending over the last several years. And we think it's much more intuitive and informational for people to follow.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me, and I looked at it in kind of briefing myself for our conversation. And you're absolutely correct. It's not difficult to use, and has a lot of information.
A lot of information.
What is interesting too is when you think about the dynamics of people and their demands. I'm sure people, I don't mean to single them out, but I'm sure people who wanted another pickleball court had no idea what it would cost.
Yeah.
So this enables them to go look and say, well, okay, I want another pickleball course.
Yep.
Is it worth $30,000 to?
Yep.
Yeah.
And where'd they get that? And where'd they get that number from, right?
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Here's some quotes that we received, so you can look and see.
Right.
Now, when we go and do it, we're going to have to do a bid and a spec and get multiple quotes and do all that. But this is for planning purposes and budgeting purposes. You see that there's thought put into each one of the processes.
That's right, and I agree with you, and that's the advantage. And I think this is very aptly named a transparency project, because it's what creates more credibility for the things.
That's what you want. You want people to know exactly what's happening, and that's how you can have a better dialogue about whether or not this is something. Listen, when you're a local government, there's things you have to provide and there's things you don't have to provide. Do you have to even have a recreation program? The answer is no, you don't, but it is part of what makes a difference in the community. It's why people want to live here, because of a particular program. We have a great seniors program. We're not required to provide a seniors program, But you look at our numbers, you look at the programs they offer, it's kind of what makes up the Rye Brook difference. You know, why do you want to live here? Well, you've got this program that people have decided they'd like to have.
Okay. So it's on the website, I think, as Chris demonstrated. So for anyone who's interested in getting more detail about a particular item, that's the place to go.
Mhm.
Pretty, as a person who's not overly familiar with such things, it was pretty user friendly. So this is all good. All
Glad
right,
to hear it.
let's go back then to the other question I had about this. You've entered into about 20 shared services agreements, notably for EMS, fire, and the library. Any new, and those are cost reducing for the
Mhm.
village because you get some economies of scale. Are there any new opportunities for shared services on the horizon?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And we can, yeah, as you said, we do a lot of shared services here. We always say, you know, Rye Brook, the small and mighty Rye Brook. That's the way we say. But in order to keep your costs down, you need to play well in the sandbox with others. You know, you need to work with other people. So we take a lot of pride in working with other municipalities, whether it be Portchester, Rye City, across the street with Greenwich. You know, we have a very good relationship with the town of Greenwich. And people don't realize that. We've done studies with them, traffic studies on King Street with them. And, you know, we do an awful lot on shared services. The after-school program is an example of a shared service with the school district. Again, we're one of only 2 municipalities in the county that do something like that. That's a state-run after-school program. That's state licensed. And the school allows us to use their facilities. And, you know, we have the kids come over from the school and we're able to do that. That's a great shared service. And it also provides extra revenue to offset property taxes. So there's benefits all around. We have existing shared service agreements on equipment sharing. You know, if our sewer truck broke, we could go call Portchester, and we already have agreements in place with Portchester and Rye and Tuckahoe and other municipalities. We have this equipment sharing intermunicipal agreements where all we have to do is just exchange an email. We already have insurance in place. We already have it all set up. We borrow each other's equipment. And that's a two-way street. We both do that. So that's another way we could share costs, you know, rather than having to go out or rent or do a overpay for equipment that we have to rush and buy if we can't get repaired quickly, or, you know, we don't have to do any of that. We're able to work it out. Some of the things we're currently doing is working with the city of Rye on flood studies and flood problems, trying to identify that. So that's one of the ones we're doing now and going forward. We've been meeting with like Purchase College. We're trying to work together because flooding doesn't stop at municipal borders. You know, flooding goes from, you know, it's a regional issue. It's not one that goes, you know, stops at entering or leaving Rye Brook. So we need to look at those things more regionally. So that's something that we work closely with the city of Rye on. We've met together with our state reps and going up to Purchase College. We've designed some plans that would help people. Just last few days, going to a different topic, even little things. I've recently met with UConn that started a training program that out of a Stanford office, and we talked about doing specific training for management personnel but it'd be expensive for Rye Brook to do on its own. You know, so what we do is we talked to Portchester and Rye City and Rye Brook. By doing that, and it becomes a very nominal cost, and we're able to get additional training by working together on each one of those types of programs. So we do a lot of shared services throughout. As you said, we have over 20 different agreements that we work with people on.
And the training is an interesting example because I would think the offering training to the staff is an important retention tool.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what people know. You know, the people you look to hire are professionals in their field. You know, these are people that serve on various boards, whether it be regional or statewide or nationally. You know, we've got a very qualified staff, highly trained staff that are they believe in their profession. You know, that's, you know, our senior coordinators are very active in the senior agencies throughout the county and the state. You know, you know, my field, Greg Rivera and I both attend meetings and conferences with people, not just in the county, but the state and even nationally, where we're able to have resources there we all can share together. Mike Nowak, as we know, is active in public works associations on the regional and state, and he does also on the tree program. He's very active in those associations as well. He works with Cornell. So all of these areas, Trish LaPree, who, by the way, I want to give a pitch since we're talking about budget. Trish LaPree is our treasurer, and as far as I'm concerned, she's the best treasurer anyone could ever ask for, and the best in the county, if not the state. She is a fantastic treasurer. She drives much of this budget information. Her and her staff do a great job preparing the budget, working with the budget, working with me. And I think we're just so lucky to have somebody like her managing our finances day to day. So we're very lucky. A quick aside, but like she's very active in the GFOA or government financial, basically it's a financial association of that has all different standards for financial planning and training. So, there's a lot that gets done that way.
Right. And, I suspect many residents don't realize it, but that type of outreach and involvement gives rise to new ideas.
Yes, 100%. That networking is essential.
Good. Let's go on to a more mundane topic. So the village has a AA bond rating, which is, for those who don't know, quite a high bond rating for a small municipality. And it has outstanding bond debt of $14 million versus a constitutional limit of $223 million. So you're way under the limit.
Mhm.
And when you say constitutional limit, is that the New York State Constitution?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
just to clarify. And there are plans to finance a new fire truck on the horizon, costs about $950,000 that I believe you intend to finance with a bond.
Mhm.
Are there other bond financings on the horizon?
Not at this time. We don't have anything planned, but depending on what comes up, say, we do a multi-year capital plan. So I wouldn't say there's any long-term financing. You might see a piece of equipment that would be financed through what they call a bond anticipation note, which is a bond. It's a note in anticipation of a bond, but those are very short-term. They're like a 5-year bond, and some of that depends on what the interest rates are at the given time, whether or not you want to do that, or you do it through that fund balance or reserve for capital improvements fund that we talked about earlier. But there's some items that are very long-term purchases that, philosophically, there's a thought that, that you should be financing something that's long-term over a longer term. So the taxpayer should be paying for that over the lifespan of that facility. An example of that would be like our highway garage. That's obviously a very big cost. That's, over a $10 million project. So what you should do is the cost should be borne over the lifespan of the bond. And that's what we've done. That's something that people will use that facility and the benefits of that facility for many years, nor could you pay that much right up front. So that would be an example. The rates were low. We go out for a serial bond and the rates were very low, and we're able to finance that over time, and residents would pay for it over time and continue to get the use and the benefits over time.
Right.
So a fire truck too has over 20-year lifespan. So there's, you can finance that over different periods of time.
Right. And yes, that's it sounds like good budgeting.
Yeah, but what you wouldn't do is do like road resurfacing from a bond, because you need to invest in it every year. So all you're going to be doing is building up a bigger account where and paying interest on something that's a recurring expense every year.
Right. Well, the last point I'd like to make before asking you for any additional comments, Chris, is because this is I've heard people talk about how high the taxes are. So I think it's really worth pointing out to people that when they pay their property taxes, only about 19% of the check goes to the village. The big user of tax revenues is the school district. We pay some to the state, a small amount, 1% to the town of Rye, but basically the village only receives 19%.
Yeah, the town gets a small piece, the county gets a piece, the village, and the largest is the school district.
Right,
And that's typical in all municipalities.
right. Any final comments, Chris?
No, the other thing I'd say is, the direction, it really is a team effort. This is something in preparing a budget and working with the budget. We're very lucky here. Some places go, oh, ask for the world and hope, they're going to cut it back. We don't try not to play games here. The village board provides great direction to us. We try our best to stay within the tax cap, and we've been very successful with that. If we're not, there's reasons for it. But the board provides very clear direction. We've got a great staff, as I mentioned, the treasurer and the treasurer's office, but all the department heads and all the departments, they know not to spend down their budgets, not to ask for the world and hope to get less, because they think they're going to get less. Come at us straight. Let's do what's right. Let's keep our taxes reasonable. Let's not, we don't want to overtax. We very closely look at our audits every year to make sure we're not overtaxing residents but also being appropriate in our estimates. And we're very lucky here in Rye Brook, to have a team that really works together to really make it all happen. And, we do our best to try to balance what is required to be provided versus what makes the Rye Brook difference. And that's the balance. And that's what we like to hear from people too. What do they want to see or expect in terms of services? Where particularly those that are more, I'll call optional services that does add value. So that's the balancing that we always go through each and every year.
Right.
And you mentioned the bond rating. There's only one rating higher, which is AAA. And that we're at the next level, which would be very difficult of a community our size to get AAA. So we're very happy, we're very happy with the bond rating that we have. There's also something called a New York State fiscal transparency, it's a New York State program that looks at fiscal stress. Doesn't mean we're not stressed. It just personally, but the fiscal stress looks at different analysis, and it's a number system. At 40, the number when it hits 45, it starts to become a concern. The number 45, we're at 0. So we're very proud of that too. So that means we, from the controller's office standpoint, that we're at a 0 fiscal stress standpoint, shows that you're fiscally healthy.
And when they measure fiscal health, what they're looking at what?
Oh, there's a whole series of factors, John. I could show you the whole
Oh,
spreadsheet
okay.
on it,
Another
but
conversation.
it's basically, yeah, what is your debt loads? What are your, are you overspending your budget? Trends in service, trends in that over 3 years, are you starting to increase over time, either your expenditures or your debt? There's all different factors they look at to say, there's signs of stress that you need to address now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I think this has been informative for me, and I think it will be informative for our listeners. And it's because you're kind of informative and open about the information especially with the new transparency program. If you ever do have to violate the cap, at least people will be able to understand why it's happening.
Yeah, there'd be a reason for it. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.